Hello, everybody. Hi. We are a small but mighty. Hold on one second. A little bit Okay, I'm not going to just try to cope with it. Hi, everybody. My name is Lizzie Wagner, and I am the clinical director and owner of Young. And we are here tonight to talk about embodying liberation in trauma care from a Native American perspective. Chase Worth will be presenting tonight. Hold on one second. This echoes really bad. One sec. Okay, let's see how this. Um, First things first, we will be recording. We are recording this. Everybody's identities are anonymous, but it is being recorded, so just know that. And I am pausing because I have an echo, so I want to make sure that I don't get confused over my words. So just know that that's what the awkwardness is that we're doing. Okay, so just to say, right now we're in a moment where anti-oppressive work is criticized. And the invitation tonight is just to be humans together, to really listen to the experience of Chase, his lived experience and his professional experience. And the invitation is to embody this teaching in your own self. So I just want to invite you right now to do a gentle body scan and just really bring yourself to the present moment. And put yourself in a posture of being present and listening. And being really curious. And with that, I'm going to bring Chase on.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Chase, can you
Solo?
There you go. Perfect.
Sweet. Lizzie, will you kind of just explain the terms that are going to be shared real quick? If you're able.
Yes. Thank you for that. I will, in the chat, I'm going to put some definition of terms that Chase and I used for the presentation at Colorado Counseling Association's conference in August. I'll also include some resources, the bibliography that we shared with that group too.
Awesome. So if everything's great, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. Is our audio good? Awesome. So thanks for joining tonight. This, kind of like we said, this was something that was developed kind of as a passion project, but also specifically for the Colorado Counselors Association. I presented on it in August of last year, I believe. And a lot of it comes from as I've kind of engaged in trauma care, both in my own life, but also as a professional now, that I really started to recognize how much of this work, it presents an inherent power dynamic. And so I even noticed certain clients wanting me to participate in that power dynamic. And so I really wanted to develop something that just kind of communicated something from my worldview and also communicated something from a broad, and I'll say later, broad and monolithic Native American point of view. And so, yeah, that's ultimately what today's objective is to just kind of present this idea of how do we embody a sense of liberation, even in trauma care, because we can often perpetuate that, but also just wanting to present something from my own self. And so, as I'm going to show, a lot of trauma treatment coming from communities of color, it's coming from people within their communities now. And so, even in how I present today, hoping to embody that. And so, I'm going to kind of give a broad overview of some various trauma treatments that are from dominant cultural perspectives, specifically going to kind of go from maybe less liberating, more oppressive to some of the more liberating perspectives. And so the first one is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, very common in a lot of the counseling field. It is a widely used approach that helps individuals identify and challenge negative thought patterns and behaviors resulting from trauma, replacing them with healthier ones. Prolonged exposure therapy, it's a type of CBT that involves gradual and repeated exposure to the trauma-related memories, feelings, and situations to reduce their power and help the individual process the trauma. There's cognitive processing therapy, another form of CBT specifically designed for PTSD. It helps individuals reframe and change the negative beliefs they developed as a result of trauma, ultimately still an emphasis on negative, positive, and rationality. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a therapy that uses bilateral stimulation, so like guided eye movements and such, also engaging different auditory things as well sometimes, while the individual recalls traumatic memories, aiming to reprocess and reduce the distress associated with those memories. Accelerated resolution therapy, or ART, is trauma treatment designed to rapidly reduce the distress associated with traumatic memories. It combines elements of CBT and EMDR and other therapeutic approaches. IFS, or internal family systems, or just kind of general parts work. It's a therapy that views the mind as made up of different parts or subpersonalities, some of which hold trauma. IFS helps individuals heal by understanding and harmonizing these parts, particularly those burdened with trauma. Brain spotting. It is a therapy that focuses on identifying eye positions or brain spots linked to unresolved trauma. Our eyes are connected to the survival center of the brain and orient to safety or threat constantly. By optimizing this, the brain then processes and releases traumatic memories and is usually more led by the client themselves. Somatic experiencing is a body-focused therapy that helps individuals release the physical tension and stress held in the body due to trauma, and it emphasizes the body's natural ability to heal. Again, is kind of led by the client more. Then there's the psychodynamic approach that is a more malleable, more, so to say, postmodern, modern interpretation of maybe the earlier, more Freudian expressions of psychology and psychoanalytic theory. But as we're going to see later in this, is really being developed by people of color. And then narrative approach is within the psychodynamic, and as I'm going to talk about later, is really this approach that requires someone to interact with their own story, their own narrative. And so as they develop their own narrative, they take power back into their own narrative and they develop this. And it's really more of a psychodynamic approach that is a model as well. And so we're going to get more in depth into those specifically later, but those are just some of the theories that we're going to be talking about today that are helpful to know. So as we're kind of even talking about trauma care and all that, really some of the things that are helpful to acknowledge are ways that, specifically in the United States, African Americans, Latinx/Hispanic backgrounds, and Indigenous people groups, they've received therapeutic care from a predominantly white perspective. And this has always kind of been this knowledge or progress at the cost of the person. And so we see this, especially in the Tuskegee experiments. If you've not heard of this, I'd encourage you to research it, of where Black men were injected with syphilis and studied in the name of medicine, the pathologizing of these people's groups and cultures. We see this with specifically Native Americans with dance, also in Black communities with dance, stuff like that. Um, how certain people groups are disproportionately affected by certain diagnoses because the culture just looks different. And so this is also especially seen since the 80s with the war on drugs, of marijuana and drug laws specifically disproportionately affecting and attacking these people groups. This is also even seen in the LA Compton area of, the difference between prison sentences in crack and cocaine. And so we really see that in the name of helping people, a lot of white perspectives of healing actually end up hurting the individual in the process. And so, I'm gonna just now kind of present these broad views of specifically psychodynamic, as I talked about earlier, brain spotting, and narrative therapeutic approaches developed by people of color. And so, specifically within the psychodynamic, the roots of it and the foundations of it are very much in European ideals and an inherent power dynamic and differential, where the therapist is a specialist and the client themselves is kind of ignorant to the process. But its broad sweeping emphasis on interacting with the unconscious allows for integration and implementation with these liberating tenets so that we can actually dismantle systems of oppression. And that's the ultimate goal and kind of what we work toward within this view that I'm presenting. This includes liberation within society, clinical spaces, and the personal lives of clinicians as well. Additionally, the psychodynamic approach allows for the biopsychosocial approach in clinical spaces, which means engaging the biological things impacting someone, the psychological things impacting, and the broader social circles as well. Through this is more holistic, and it actually acknowledges and emphasizes those social and biological factors that are impacting a client rather than just the individual experience and it being pathologized. Since this psychodynamic approach seeks to understand and represent the human experience, especially within the clinical space and relationship, it proves to be adaptable. And it comes to no surprise that most therapeutic approaches being developed by people of color are actually psychodynamic in nature. This actually kind of shows how the resilience of these communities, these oppressed people groups, they're taking something that was actually meant to oppress and they're turning it into something liberating. This also seeks to explain the atrocities of racism while conceptualizing health and growth within the client's frame and cultural context. Since the primary goal of this is to bring the unconscious to consciousness, this then allows space for us to bring to light the impact of historical trauma and cultural context on the client's well being and treatment. Theories of psychological understanding and treatment being developed by people of color within this framework specifically. It's in the bibliography as well, is Dr. Blackdeer, Dr. Braveheart, Duran, Haskins, Horton, Menakem, specifically from a social works perspective, Mullen, Steele, and Newton, and more. And we'll kind of interact with them more in the narrative perspective as well. But as I said in the bibliography, all these people are listed as actively developing very narrative and psychodynamic approaches by and for people of color. So, kind of transitioning though to brain spotting. Brain spotting is it's a little bit more young in its theory than EMDR, but it really engages the reprocessing and engages the visual and auditory fields of really trying to process that trauma. And so the biggest difference within this and EMDR, and I think EMDR has its place within acute trauma, but especially within complex and relational trauma, where we're interacting, with years and years of repeated impacts, is that there's this real experience of powerlessness. And so it's a little bit counterintuitive that in the reprocessing that we actually put the client in a state of powerlessness. And so brain spotting is really a theory that allows for the client to take a sense of strength and power and autonomy back in their own reprocessing. And even within this of, it's built on the therapeutic relationship. And that's even something that I'm going to talk about is that a trauma care that's inherently liberating is inherently relational as well.
Mm.
And so within brain spotting as well, there's kind of this idea that we really can't fully re-traumatize the client because they're leading it. There's no way for us to fully re-traumatize them because we're not leading. And so not only that, but it takes the power, it takes the kind of guidance away from the therapist. And so there's not as much literature out about this within this. I'm really hoping to kind of challenge the idea and concept of evidence-based interventions of oftentimes they're only certified through the use of money and capital, which as we see is only given to those in power. And so I'm hoping to challenge for more validity given to this theory. Moving on to narrative therapy, while narrative therapy may fall under the umbrella of psychodynamic theory because of its interactions with the individual's unconscious story, it's explained separately in this because of its different emphases. Narrative therapy, or otherwise known as narrative exposure therapy, is a social constructionist approach, which means it allows for the deconstructing of power dynamics while elevating the client's ability to create a comprehensive chronological timeline of their life in an effort to contextualize, desensitize, and reprocess traumatic events and associations. This allows for the individual to highlight their own sense of liberation while embodying it through the process of creating their own narrative and timeline. While narrative therapy presents a model to follow as an approach, it's not necessarily an objective standard for health and growth. And instead, it interacts and actually mirrors the client's internal and external contexts. The majority of the authors that were previously mentioned either integrate or embrace fully narrative therapy within their approaches. A lot of the bibliography, as you're going to see, kind of emphasizes that, or even in the titles is going to say, narrative therapy from this approach or whatever. The authors mentioned as well in their perspectives, theories, and approaches are all people of color, and their writings are for their specific communities. And while there is an emphasis on broad sweeping decolonization of the world, and especially mental health care specifically, they all unabashedly represent their own contexts, while communicating it is meant primarily for their own cultures of origin. This is kind of the example of embodying liberation that I'm trying to present, is that as they utilize their influence and privilege within academia to challenge white spaces and perspectives, they're not asserting their own views as an objective standard for all. Instead, they only speak as part of their communities while attempting to mitigate any power dynamics within that. So, I know we're pretty theory heavy, but we're slowly moving kind of toward what I'm presenting. But we're going to kind of compare and contrast these different, more liberating approaches with the kind of traditional. And so the traditional psychodynamic approach overemphasizes power and internal forces while oftentimes ignoring those external realities and contexts that are so obviously affecting someone. Additionally, they conceptualize the self and identity as almost entirely fixed or solid and permanent and not changing. The different behavioral therapies mentioned before dominating the counseling field conceptualize the self reductionistically as rational and irrational thoughts or something very similar and seek to move toward rationality. Many of the reprocessing and kind of resurgent psychodynamic theories and approaches, such as EMDR and IFS, they really still present an inherent power differential within the clinical space and relationship. And the therapist is still the expert on healing. They still primarily guide it. The approaches presented, conversely, seek to eliminate any of these systems of power within the clinical space and emphasize the person of the therapist as well. Additionally, they interact extensively with the inner world and experiences of the client while giving the proper space to the external contexts as well. An integration of this biological, psychological, and social understanding of the individuals and the communities conceptualize humanity then as dynamic, nuanced, and beyond white understandings of self. The process of growth and healing is set and guided by the client within the context of a very deep and empathic connection within the therapist and the client, and the power dynamic is mitigated as much as possible. Within this, all therapeutic care is done within the frame of the client, that is, they're guiding it, as the therapist just attempts to be as non judgmental as possible. Additionally, they emphasize embodying a sense of liberation and decolonization both within and outside clinical spaces. While shared lived experiences are not required for effective and healing therapy, as we see through a lot of research, the presented approaches emphasize this for people of color and clients coming from oppressed people groups. So, within that, as I kind of am presenting these views, I'm going to present first a broad multicultural approach and kind of just across the board, and then I'm going to present a broadly monolithic North American, Native American view, and then I'm going to present specifically from my own life and just like I said, my life as a clinician. But with this, before that, before we present any view, need to acknowledge and explain the reality of racialized, historical, and generational trauma. So within this, any view that's presented must be robust, educated, and have a uniform understanding of trauma, its symptoms, developmental impacts, and contributing co-occurring events and symptoms. And this is necessary in determining effective treatments and therapeutic approaches in individuals and communities. So what does that mean? It means that trauma needs to be defined as very widespread rather than just so acute and small. So within this, I believe that trauma can be understood as a painful and distressing physical and/or psychological experience resulting from an event, series of events, or ongoing adversity, examples such as poverty, discrimination, oppression, etc. Trauma then can be experienced as an objective or subjective exposure to singular or recurring events that lower the quality of life and constitute a core part of identity in an individual or a community. According to Stahlbeck et al. From a 2013 research article, the overwhelming mass of trauma exposure in the United States among minority groups is continuous and includes multiple co-occurring types of traumas. Consequently, ongoing trauma paired with other co-occurring types of traumas and experiences may result in distinct and very widespread symptoms. As a result, individuals and communities who experience trauma are often diagnosed with a multitude of comorbid diagnoses in an attempt to accurately capture their experiences and symptoms. So this can even look like, someone presenting as coming forward with both, depression, ADHD, anxiety, that multiple things that they don't necessarily fully fit, but it comes from these specific events that are ongoing in their life. It's very common from people within oppressed people groups that come with trauma to have multiple diagnoses because they're not fully explained by one thing. And then I really want to present this concept of historical trauma and something that I'm doing research on, and not many people other than some Native American groups and then some people studying the effects of the Holocaust down the road have really attempted to define. And so Braveheart in a 2003 and 1998 research articles defines historical trauma as cumulative emotional and psychological wounding across generations, including the lifespan, which emanates from massive group trauma. Historical trauma theory frames lifespan trauma in the collective historical context, which actually empowers these survivors within oppressed people groups of both communal and individual trauma by reducing the sense of stigma and isolation. Essentially, this term just seeks to validate people within these people groups because for so long they've kind of existed coping, but not really having even a term or sense of connection with what's happened. So, kind of getting to the meat of this presentation, like I said, first I'm going to present a very broad multicultural approach and kind of recurring themes among oppressed cultures as we think of embodying liberation and trauma care. So, a broad multicultural approach acknowledges and attempts to dismantle systems of oppression, both within and outside of clinical spaces. Like I said, a lot of this emphasizes the person of the counselor. And so, within this approach, hoping to see attempts to dismantle systems of oppression in their personal lives and clinical lives. This embraces the components of individual work and dynamics while emphasizing the impact of culture, context, and other systemic factors affecting the well being and therapeutic journey of the client or clients. Something I even see within this of, with the recent political administration almost gutting Medicaid, many of my clients' well beings on Medicaid instantly changed since January 20th. And so, recognizing that it's not just pathology within their lives, but it's very real contexts affecting them. That if we weren't attempting to embody liberation, it could just be seen as something pathological, as turning helplessness inward rather than validating their very real fears. Within this broad multicultural approach, it is critically conscious and active about the power dynamic and differential between the therapist and client while attempting to alleviate it in any circumstance they're able to do so. An example of this within my own life as a therapist is oftentimes I get people coming in wanting me to fix them. And to which I tell them that's not my job and I'm not in the business of fixing people. And if they'd like that, then they can meet with somebody else. But and I obviously say that kindly, but within that we're not trying to fix people. We're not trying to stay in power and um, ultimately control and manipulate our clients, but that we're coming alongside them in a journey. In this view, there's an active seeking to dismantle systems of oppression and power. And so, what that means, for some, that's advocacy, that's protesting, certain things like that. We have to participate to survive within the West, but at the same time, that there are very active ways that they're trying to dismantle these systems. There's also an active seeking to decolonize understandings of counseling theories, clinical applications, and their own personal lives in the most extensive way possible. I recognize that I'm in a field dominated primarily by white people and white views. And so, we say privilege isn't inherently bad, but it's what we do with that. And so, within this broad multicultural approach, it really challenges the majority of white therapists to be decolonizing their own lives, but also the counseling theories that they're applying, to be questioning, what are the roots of these and how is this showing up in my work as a therapist? This view emphasizes relationship, cultural context, and community. Specifically within a white view, there's this emphasis on individuation in creating own sense of self and self-actualization. And so, within that, this multicultural approach actually kind of takes it away of, rather than cutting people off, being your own self actualizing, that it's staying connected within your culture, that it's staying connected within relationships, and finding a sense of community. And, whether someone's an atheist or not, that there's a sense of spirituality as well. This view also seeks to redefine the understanding of evidence based interventions and elevate theories developed by and for people of oppressed cultures. Again, as we really see, the concept of an evidence based intervention is ultimately supported and developed with people with the most money and with the most support. And usually that is within majority cultures. And so, this is even within the concept of like land ownership and things like that. And so it's really hard to develop and elevate oppressed people groups developing their own theories if they don't have the money, if they are inherently not experiencing equality or equity. And so within this, that again, the people within this approach, that if they have privilege, that's not inherently bad, but it's what we do with it that matters most. And so being able to elevate those people. This view also acknowledges and it emphasizes the neurobiological impact and perspective within trauma care. Being able to acknowledge the impact on the brain and the body of trauma. It is not just this hidden psychological esoteric thing that we have to look at. It is truly, it affects our cells. And that it takes time to heal too. And so, really, like I said, emphasizing that we're interacting with the brain and body as well. Kind of moving on, getting a little bit more narrow of now this is kind of a broad monolithic view of North American indigenous cultures, kind of their approach to healing and liberation. I even think of Denver March powwow is coming up next month, and um, a lot of people don't know, but my tribe doesn't powwow, and I go to powwow of it's a time to celebrate, it's a time to dance, but my tribe doesn't do this, and so oftentimes North American indigenous groups are kind of presented as this one very uniform group, whereas we are very nuanced and there's a lot of differences. And so, but I like to kind of present this view of as I hope to work more with Native American clinicians and researchers that we can agree on certain things. And so, within this, it acknowledges the existence and the impact of historical, generational, and ongoing traumas. And so that is both the historical, like I said, just the things that happened to our ancestors. For me, a lot of our current culture is built on the Trail of Tears. I even think of smallpox blankets being handed out during that time of which if you don't know, there were blankets that Europeans would infect with smallpox and gift it to Native American communities. And since they had never interacted with this disease before, it wiped them out. Um, Generational trauma as a result of historical trauma of it just keeps getting passed to each generation. And so even for the people now of the disproportionate impact that they experience and um, even acute traumas and such like that. Within this view, it also encourages reconnecting with culture of origin slash tribal culture. And so, a lot of people within the United States, to participate as an American, you have to give up any culture of origin. And as we see, even with the Western view of medicine, that to heal, you have to hurt yourself. And this actually reverses that and it encourages to reconnect with culture of origin. Um, and within that, that looks different with each culture of how you return back. But um, even then, I've seen Filipino immigrants that feel like they have to give up that part of themselves to participate in American culture, and there's a certain reality to that. That to participate in capitalism, you have to have a different work ethic, but that doesn't mean you have to give up part of yourself. That you have to disconnect to connect, and so this view really emphasizes reconnecting with that. It also interacts with the art of story and myth, regardless of its factual truth. And what that means, and the best example I know how to give, is even as I interact with my own spirituality, my own beliefs from my tribe, is something that we kind of adopt is that we don't need it to be true for us to believe in it. That there's story and that there's myth and that there's something beautiful about the physical world that we're thankful for the scientists that can tell us evolution and all that, but then there's something beautiful of our creation stories and that we don't need it to be true for it to be real to us. This view emphasizes unity and differences across different oppressed cultures, which kind of mimics the similarities and differences among tribes of um, I come to the table elevating even Black voices within this, but there's a lot of different cultural values within Black culture, specifically, African American culture and my culture. And there's even differences within Black culture, say within Oklahoma, Texas, Georgia, that there are differences among those, but there's also unity. And there's this sense of we are together, but we are not uniform, which has often been the Western expression. This view also encourages familial connection, service, and integration. Example I give of this is often a lot of white therapists will encourage, cutting off family, having hard boundaries. Whereas a lot of communities of color, we don't really have that luxury. It's, family is everything. And family is also more than just blood. And so being able to then work within that context rather than asserting, strict boundaries we have to break off is really necessary within this view. Uh, The sense of justice and punishment is oriented toward restorative and organic rather than punitive. I'm reading by Foucault of Discipline and Punishment. Of He really explains that a lot of the Western view of justice and punishment is very punitive, is very penal, and um, really just harms the individual rather than restoring them to a part of society and oriented toward goodness. And so, a lot of this view sees justice as restorative and healing rather than just this punitive view. Within that, health and healing are not linear, nor is there a one size fits all for clinical applications. Even within my own life, but with my clients as well, we return to the same things. I'm still returning to things I was talking about 5 years ago in therapy, and I return to it in a different way. But by the Western standard, I didn't really heal at all. That we're right back to ground zero. Whereas within this view, I'm healing in new ways and uncovering things that I didn't know were affected until I was ready. This view is also inherently spiritual and conceptualizes trauma as a soul wound. Within Native American culture, there is this broad view that, the physical is spiritual and the spiritual is physical, that there is this intertwining of the both. And so I'll actually tell my clients that we're working on a sense of spirituality, of being able to connect with yourself, connect with others, and connect with something bigger than yourself. It also conceptualizes the self as being inherently informed primarily by the community, that there's this symbiotic relationship with community. That community tells me who I am, and by me knowing who I am, I'm able to participate in community. And it's this ongoing relationship. Within this as well, it embraces ideas of dance, even a somatic, expression, traditional medicines, and connecting with nature and land. Something that I'll often tell specifically to Native American clients is, when's the last time you planted something? When's the last time you worked with your hands in the ground? That we're meant to be embodied with earth. And oftentimes the only time I really recommend something is if they're feeling disconnected from their bodies, go work with dirt, honestly. Within this view as well, it attempts to dismantle economic, social, and political systems to return resources to different tribes and specifically, people that are indigenous to that area. And so this is kind of the land back movement that I'm referencing. Um, it's deeply impactful. It would really disrupt the United States way of life, and that kind of happened to us. And so I think, honestly, for true healing, for true reconciliation, it requires some disruption. Within this, it really celebrates children as the next generation. Um, a client brought up the other day of this rule of seven, that how does what I do honor generations, seven generations back, and what will my actions mean for seven generations in the future? And so within this, there's a real elevation of children and elders within our community, whereas within a lot of white communities, elders and children are kind of just thrown to the side. And then within this, it elevates local stories and anecdotal resources rather than research and external data and statistics. That's not to say that we do away with this more objective research oriented data, but really we're emphasizing, this indigenous wisdom, the people. I kind of say it's really hard to get any data within Native American communities if you're not in them, because they really don't trust you. And so that you have to be a part of this to even speak for them. So, lastly, I'm going to move kind of to my own experience and my own tribal ethic, kind of learned and presented, kind of considering counseling, trauma care, and just my own life. And so I was born and raised on the Cherokee Nation Reservation of Oklahoma in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. My tribe is a matriarchal society that emphasizes women as the leaders in family and culture. And so, where I'm from, it's very common, very normal, very comfortable for me for women to be in charge. And it's even funny of where I grew up. When I go to powwow, I introduce myself. I say I'm Chase Worth. I kind of explain who my family is, and then I say I'm from Tahlequah, Oklahoma, almost every time they cut me off before I say what tribe I am because they say, Cherokee. And so I grew up thinking everybody was Cherokee because everywhere I looked, they were. And I learned we're actually a very small population. But um, there's an emphasis on work ethic, family, and faith, which does kind of resemble some white culture. A lot of my tribe is actually, uh, we're kind of made fun of. We really embraced a lot of Christian ideals, but we were actually the first, we established the first seminary that had women. And so, even within this, we were still kind of pushing diversity within that. But um, kind of a quote about this is, nobody works hard and rests harder than a Native American, and so specifically a Cherokee. Um, we really have a slower way of life, and we kind of de-emphasize the importance of money. And so, even though we have a high work ethic, we say, you know, even with words, we say, don't do anything and don't say anything that's not worth doing or saying. And so, we see that with our work ethic and our words, but we really don't care about the importance of money. Um, the goal of work is not to get rich, but to do a good job and to bring honor to our people. We don't build up the self, but we credit successes to culture and context. So I'll kind of say, you go to a native graduation and maybe to a fault sometimes, but we'll kind of put down our own achievements and we'll elevate the people around us. We'll even name, our parents, our grandparents, our aunts, our uncles, our great grandparents, stuff like that, for kind of building us up and getting us to where we're at because we recognize we wouldn't be who we are without them. Uh, we uh, we really value silence and listening rather than speaking and giving opinions. Um, Kind of a joke with other natives is if you go into a room, the loudest person talking the most is probably a white man, and so whereas the other natives are usually pretty quiet and just looking at each other and listening. My tribe specifically often distrustful of men and other outside of the community. And so a lot of this comes from our historical trauma and being hurt by white men outside of the community. Within the Cherokee view, it sees the family unit as expansive and not defined by blood. And so I always just say I have a lot of aunts and uncles that I'm not related to. And even my best friend's children, they call me Uncle Chase. And so a lot of this is, that's a true expression of family. Whereas a lot of more European or Euro American views sees a very clear delineation between family and friends. This Cherokee view is also distrustful of Western medicine and seeking help outside of family and community. So within this, it makes sense, but also it's a little hard. It's hard to reach my own community because to get help outside of family is kind of shameful. And to talk bad about things that happen to you from family specifically, uh, it's seen as shameful. It's seen as involving people that aren't supposed to be involved. And so that's often a barrier within these communities. Um, because of their primarily experience with Western medicine, though, they actually understand counseling as a way to fix parts of self rather than a journey of healing. And so I actually experienced this in my own life of, at 10 years old, I was diagnosed with ADHD, depression, and anxiety. Whereas now I know that if I saw my own case come forward, um, I would say that sounds like trauma. And, we can address these certain symptoms, but as we see within my own community, I look about once a month. There's not one therapist on my reservation that specializes in trauma. They're all behavioral therapists. And they're just seeking to fix the symptoms and move people along. And so that's often a barrier and something that I even see within other Native Americans that are coming into care with me. And so they've experienced primarily a medical model from outside practitioners with little to no representation from our own communities. Uh, this is primarily because, and most people don't know this, the stereotype that Native Americans get free health care of we have what's called Indian Health Services. And so these are hospitals and clinics that are free to tribal members, but they are staffed, and I think they have the lowest compensation rates for any medical professionals in the entire world. Is a statistic I recently read, and so they're not getting the best doctors, they're not getting the best therapists or whatever. And most of people from my community, this is where they're getting it. And even within off the reservations, the majority of Native Americans are on welfare or Medicaid. And so they're more just um, getting what they can get. And so within this view of I'm really attempting to challenge these of rather than just intervening, just trying to fix behavior, it's more of a holistic view. And so this is just kind of background coming from, these views that I'm presenting from my own community and my own experiences. But the biggest thing that I could present on, though, as we kind of wrap up, of I think a Cherokee view of embodying liberation and trauma care, but something that I would even emphasize to white clinicians or even just other people of color is that we're going to emphasize victory rather than focusing solely on trauma or experiences of oppression. I do think that we need to rightfully so recognize the trauma that my community and the broader Native community and people of color have experienced. But oftentimes in that process, we can actually swing the pendulum and end up overemphasizing that. And so it's pretty funny of I go back home and if I tell somebody even something small that I've done of I did this presentation or whatever, they're gonna throw a party for me. And so the communities are actually emphasizing victories. And I think that within this view, we need to be emphasizing victories as well. And so, yeah, as I'm kind of wrapping up, that is kind of the view of a Cherokee view of embodying liberation and trauma care. That ultimately, within this, we are just hoping to emphasize the victories while also acknowledging the impact of trauma on these communities. And so, with that, I'm finished with my presenting part. Uh, Lizzie, I think we're going to go
Yeah.
in Q&A
Yeah.
time.
Um, well, thank you so much, Chase. And thank you all for being here and listening. It's such an important way of thinking and being. And since I don't have an echo now, I will say that, when I first met Chase when he was an intern in grad school, this was a passion of his and something that is such an honor to get behind. And so this is just one plot in your life story and passions, and you're going to be studying this for your career, and so eager to see where all this goes. And I would just encourage everybody on the call to think about Chase if you have context to meet somebody that is Native or looking to do trauma work from a mindset of a person of color. So thank you so much, Chase, and thank you all for being here. And I didn't have any questions in the chat, so all the excuse me, all the references and all the definitions are there. We'll keep those up for you. And thank you so much. Take care, everybody.